3, 2, 1. Welcome to the David the Dog Trainer podcast, episode 59. Here we are, joined by special guests, Michelle and Bridget.
Hello.
Hello.
So last time Bridget was on this podcast was like episode 6.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Michelle was probably 13 or something.
Yeah, and now I work for Miracle. So
Crazy times.
that's an update.
Wild times.
Hey.
Here we are. What is going on? Anybody? Josh, Michelle, Bridget. Anybody want to fill people in on stuff?
Ladies, please.
Dogs are doing good. Only 6, so you have 4.
I do. I have 4 dogs. I started making a dog sweater last night with no rhyme or reason of the size, and I figured I'd give it to you, and you probably have a dog that could wear it.
Yeah.
I'm
Like
gonna
a
start with
nice
you.
gradient of size of dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm
You know.
saying. I'm like, whatever size this ends up, I think Bridget will have a dog that.
Somebody
It'll
will
fit.
fit into it.
Yes.
And
What's-
enjoy it.
What's the Star Boy been up to? I feel like I haven't seen him in a minute.
Sleeping,
Yeah.
being lazy, gained a little weight.
Can pull that mic a little bit closer.
There. He's good.
You moved
little
it
bit
up. You
closer.
got to pull it closer.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yeah, but you just
need
moved
to be,
towards
right
it.
here. Right on it.
I feel like official podcaster.
There you go.
Yes.
That's better.
Yes.
That's much better.
I was gonna say he's at least kept the weight off though, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. In the winter months, we haven't been so consistent.
That's all right.
That's
Yeah.
when you just feed him less.
Yeah. Yeah, he eats a lot less now.
That's good.
Nice.
I still remember the days when you first got him, and his stomach was just
Touching the
dragging on the
ground.
ground.
He
I
was
like,
so freaking big. It
Yeah, he
was shocking, almost how big he was.
yeah, his stomach was touching the ground that he got road rash on his stomach and huge
my
open
God.
sores. He was very sad.
That is sad.
but now he's living his best life.
He is. He's a good boy.
Michelle, give me your top 2 favorite dogs you've trained since you've been at Miracle.
My top 2 favorite?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, man. They've all been pretty awesome.
You got any
I
that
think-
stick off the top of your head?
Axwell, I think he's one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
We trained him. He had a lot of issues with dogs, and so we worked on that quite a bit with him socializing. And then she moved to New Mexico, and now she posts videos of him on their off-leash hiking trails all
I
the
saw
time.
you repost that one. That was
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, now
Yeah.
he's rocking it. He used to never really be able to be around dogs at all.
What about, I guess it sounds like he would probably be in this list. Your favorite personal transformation of a dog you've worked with so far since you've been there? The one that just came in like a real asshole and just turned out to not be one.
Honestly, he wasn't an asshole. The Axel was a good one. Who? I gotta think. I've trained a lot of dogs since I've started there.
Yeah.
Come back to me.
All
I'm
right.
gonna look through my list.
Bridget, what about you? Top 2 favorite dogs in the last... Let's just say, since you've been training dogs, if you had 2 that stick in your head, that you've directly just trained.
Henry. Do you remember Henry?
Which Henry? There was a lot of Henrys.
He's a big boy.
Is he the cattle dog?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Jessica's dog?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that dog. He was great.
Really? He's, not that he's a bad dog by any means, but...
His personality was just great.
Yeah.
He had everything I'd be looking for in a dog. He was sweet, and then his weight loss was also really rewarding.
Oh, yeah. He was pretty big.
Yeah, and then they were very receptive to lessening his food, and they were like, yeah, when we take him over to Grandma's house, she just feeds him. And I was like, well, tell Grandma no. But I loved him. But I trained so many.
I know it's hard to think of when you're put on the spot.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
There
That's
really
why I
is
looked
a
through
lot
my
of them.
list. Morty and Pippa. You remember them?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
They were good
We're
ones.
going to talk about them today for sure because that's a
Really?
good it's a great example of
Yeah.
the dogs fighting, right? They were getting in gnarly. She thought she was going to have to rehome or put down one of those dogs. So, yeah, for
Little
sure.
Morty.
He's just a little bit of a butthead, but
He is.
I do like him. Even when I did that one little assessment with him originally,
Yeah.
I could tell he's cool.
He's a cool
I
little
like
dog.
him.
He is.
You got one more, Bridget?
Do you remember that shepherd Glock?
Yeah.
I liked him a lot.
Glock is still,
Glock.
I believe Glock is still my profile picture on my Facebook page.
Oh, really?
Me with Glock.
That's funny.
Oh, really?
I think so. Maybe it wasn't.
I don't think it
Was there another young German Shepherd we worked with?
There was.
Probably.
With
Yeah,
a
it
gun
wasn't
name?
What the hell
Glock.
was his name?
Because I took that picture, I think.
Yeah, you did.
And I don't think his name
Yeah,
was
yeah,
Glock.
yeah. This one. Who is this? Maybe it'll say. Remember this guy?
No.
You don't remember this one?
That's
What the hell was that dog? Maybe it wasn't Rocky. It was. I don't know.
it was
Whatever.
around the same time as Rocky. It was like after Rocky.
Yeah. That was a cool dog. I feel like I go through like my brain can compartmentalize like phases of my training career and like certain dogs that
Yeah.
were like really impactful in those phases. Like as of recent, like obviously like Walter is definitely on the top of the list because he was just like a stud, you know, like he just like didn't really have any major issues, super freaking motivated, you know, it was just like fun to train. Like you look forward to getting him out for a session and stuff. Like back like what a year or two ago, like obviously Murphy is on the top of the list, and then Oso, I freaking loved Oso, man.
Oso.
He's and especially because he's just like such a pain in the ass, you
Yeah.
know. But like same deal, he's crazy motivated, and like once we got like in tune with each other, you know, like he was I really liked working with that dog.
Yeah. That was
And then
your
I have
boy.
like some of my old ones. Like there's this dog Ophelia and then Sergey. Like I had both of them at like the exact same
Sergey.
time, and they were two completely polar opposite German Shepherds. Like Ophelia was actually I heard from her owner the other day actually, but she was like a really insecure, timid, long-haired German Shepherd, and Sergey was just kind of like a very aloof but like pretty confident male German Shepherd that like was so chill 99% of the time, but then like if he got like set off by something like on a walk or something, he just turned into freaking Cujo.
I never saw that side of him because I
Yeah.
did his refresh board
Yep,
and
yep.
training. He's a good boy.
He's a really, really good dog, and he just took to everything so well and like truly calmed down with age.
Does he still board sometimes? Because I think
Yeah.
I've met him.
He
was
boarded.
older,
He
right?
did a 1 week board and train. Yeah, like right around the time you started, I think.
Okay. I think I took him for a walk.
Yeah,
He's a good boy.
He's a really good
Didn't
dog.
they move or something?
Yeah.
Like
He
out of
moved to
town?
Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Pittsburgh.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So, I think like early ones. Obviously, Moose was like still to this day was like my favorite dog. I loved that dog, and I still to this day like use his before and after. I send to people all the time. Like, take a look at this homie.
Oh, okay. So not the chocolate lab moose. That was from like East Side Heights.
Chocolate Lab Moose. I don't
Yeah.
remember that one.
Yeah, he'd always go to East Side like daycare.
Oh, we never actually trained him. He kept telling me over and over again I know exactly who you're talking about now because he was pretty young and
Yeah.
he was a handful, man. And he kept being like, every time I'd watch him leave daycare, he'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna start training soon. Start training soon. I don't think he ever did.
No, he never did.
Those, you know what's interesting is I was thinking about this last night. There is something about like the chocolate labs in particular. They are nutso, man. Like the yellow ones and stuff, like they kind of fit into that like real good like family dog tier. Like there's not a ton of behavioral issues we see out of them and stuff.
Yeah.
And the black labs, same deal. I think are a little bit like higher energy, but like we don't see a lot of major issues out of them. But chocolate labs, man. They could be
always
all over the map, like either
Wild
aggressive
childs.
or anxious or this or that. It was gnarly,
Yeah,
if you will.
the chocolate lab strain, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Got that wild streak.
Okay, cool. So what we're going to be doing... Excuse me. I'm drinking this coffee too fast. What we're going to be doing today is I want to get into a little bit of discussing working with fighting dogs, and I asked Michelle and Bridget to be on because Bridget just finished up a really awesome board and train with 2 fighting dogs that we kind of were posting a lot of stuff about, and they've been home now for about a week, just under a week, and we have a little bit of kind of updates and stuff like that since they've been home, and a lot of people were asking like how we were able to get some of the results because they were what I would consider to be a fairly intense case of fighting dogs in the grand scheme of them that we work with, and obviously Michelle saw some of the sessions that we did and stuff, so she has some stuff to add in and has worked with plenty of cases of fighting dogs in the past. We talked about, obviously, Morty and Pippa, and she's been here, and then, even past that, obviously, has worked with numerous cases of it. And I think all of us as trainers know that, like, it could be such a daunting task working with two dogs that are in the same household that are fighting with each other, because really your options are either you manage it forever and crate and rotate and like until you can't do that anymore, or you actually figure out to the core what the problem is without any management and teach these dogs somehow or facilitate these dogs somehow getting past that problem and get them to a place where they can coexist successfully with each other, And the success rate ranges all over the place for it, because it really comes down to, like, can you figure out really, like, what that solution is going to be for them? And it can be really hard and really emotionally intense for the owners to work through and stuff like that. And it's just an interesting conversation, I think. So, Bridget, what... So obviously, the contact. Why don't you give us some context on Brody and Eddie?
So Brody and Eddie, Brody was the older guy, and he'd been in the house longer. And out of the goodness of her heart, she saw Eddie's picture on, I think, Kyoga's page, and he was
Eddie's,
like,
you said?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize you got Eddie from Kyoga.
Yeah, or some shelter, but he was like emaciated. He had every problem you could have for picking a dog off the street, like worms and stuff. And she saw him and she's like, I have to have that one. And she said that the first couple months were great. And she said she remembers the exact day they started fighting, and she was popping like plastic that comes in the shipping packages. And she popped it, and they got startled, and they just started fighting. And then ever since that moment, they began fighting anytime that they were in the room together, and pretty horrible fights. And she has two other dogs in the house. She's very into rescuing. She's a very strong CrossFit lady. And she was just like at a loss for what to do. She was devastated. So it was a long journey for her. So she sent me a text that I wanted to read that was pretty impactful to me. And she said, I've never, ever been scared of dogs. And I know that dogs have their arguments, but I was completely terrified after this. Knew I was continuing with all my nervous energy, and I was not helping anything. I was beyond terrified that all four would get triggered and fight to the death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did she send you that?
Like the second week.
Second week into
Yeah.
them being with us?
Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of like getting the emotions out there. Like, I'm struggling with this.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it was very apparent in that her struggle kind of motivated me to
Yeah.
get to the bottom of the dogs fighting.
Yeah, and it's, it's crazy. Like, so I have had multiple scenarios with myself and my personal dogs of dealing with, like, fighting issues and stuff like that. And, like, especially early on, so years ago, my ex's dog and Vinny, like, literally hated each other. Like would fight to the death. Like, they got in the most gnarly freaking fights with each other you could ever imagine. Like, full knockout, drag out, like, dragging them to the emergency vet because they got holes all over them kind of shit. Like, terrifying stuff. You know what I mean? And, that was something we needed to navigate and figure out, like, how are we going to get these dogs past this? And, at the time, this was very early in my dog training career. You know what I mean? Like, I did not have all the answers. And I remember having multiple phone calls with Tyler and Buffalo, just being like, yo, like, what do I do? Like, I'm kind of at a loss right now. Like, I resorted every option that you see people talk about online of, like, oh, well, you just, like, get their obedience better, and you need to get them to respect you more, and this and that. And, like, at some point, I think I just realized, like, that wasn't the solution, right? Like, we could make dogs do bed stays all day long, right? And we could make them do down stays away from each other all day long, and this and that. And we could micromanage these behavioral issues forever until we're blue in the face, right? And try to work through these things that way. And it will be successful to an extent. You know what I mean? To an extent of, as long as you're diligent about things, there's not going to be a problem. But unless something clicked that unless we teach these dogs to kind of figure out their issue with each other and kind of teach them how to more successfully interact with each other and change the way that we look at dogs forget inner household, just dogs in general, how they communicate and how they fight with each other, and looking at it as more of a spectrum as opposed to like an on-off switch. You know, like you're never going to find that true success, and you're going to be constantly living in that fear of like, if I don't manage things just perfectly, if I don't let them out of their crate in this particular way, and if I don't, whatever, you know, it's just, it becomes unsafe still, you know? And again, I just remember like as we were working through those problems, like just how freaking stressful it was. You know what I mean? You're talking like past just the emotional hurdles of things, then the financial hurdles of like, you know, we probably spent $5,000 on like vet bills and stuff, like due to that kind of stuff. And luckily we hit a point with them like by the end where like they were able to be together pretty much all the time, aside from I think when we had like guests come over and stuff, you know? And that was truly just out of, let's just avoid that problem. You know what I mean? And then past that, so Kate, like obviously her dog Deli and Vera, when they first met each other, were pretty good with each other, but they had a lot of the competition stuff between each other. They used to play so freaking hard. And same deal, like one day, this was pretty early into Kate and I dating with each other. I was out of town and she was watching Vera, and she had Vera and Deli, and they were playing, and then it just switched. They just freaking got into battle royale with each other, and same deal. They really like fucked each other up, right? Like it was a gnarly dog fight, and like same deal. I just remember the emotions of like, oh my god, like from her end, from my end, like what are we gonna do about this, that, right? And same deal. Luckily, we kind of put them back together. We were aware of kind of the triggers that were kind of that kind of created what ultimately led to the problem, and you know how we weren't just we didn't do a good enough job of being in a position to address it the second that it happened, you know. And we put them back together, and ultimately they figured out their issue with each other, and now they're great. I mean, they haven't literally since that day gotten into any sort of squabbles with each other, because we allowed them to re-figure out how to interact with each other, as opposed to what most people do when the first fight happens, which is we immediately start separating all the time, and we immediately start anytime that we do have them out together with each other, have them on opposite sides of the room, or, you know, I start spending 2 months just doing nothing but bed stays with each other and this and that. We put them together, and we let them re-figure out their issue once they were healed up and stuff, and they kind of worked it out, you know, and it was okay. And I think that's really the missing link with this is it's looked too much as like an obedience solving problem, where in actuality it's a do these dogs know how to interact with each other problem, and are we facilitating them being able to successfully do that? So
when you say that you let them kind of Vera and Deli learn how to work through, what did that look like? Yeah,
so in their case, they didn't ever hit a point where it was super grudgy towards each other, you know? So, and typically speaking, after the first fight, it doesn't hit that point. It usually takes a couple of fights or a month of like just the conflict in the house before it starts turning that point where it's like, you know, on site we're trying to attack each other and everything. And in their case, it really was, and I see this a lot of times when we work with dogs that are getting in fights with each other, is, you know, we look at, again, play as it's play, then it's fighting, as opposed to play just being competition at its core, and as it intensifies, eventually it's going to turn into what we think of as fighting, but it's still the same thing. Like I was saying, it was on that spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. So their competition with each other, when it switched to the fighting, right, or when it intensified to the point where they were injuring each other, that's typically where we would want to create that off switch, right? That's typically where, okay, cool, we're going to let you guys work it out. We're going to let you guys work it out. And then it hits this point where it intensifies too much, and then we shut it down, and then we let you guys kind of get back into the groove and go up on that spectrum again until you guys figure out your problem, right? So it turned into the fight, right? Unfortunately, Kate wasn't in a position to be able to stop it. I don't think that their e-collars on or something. And luckily her friend was there, and they were able to break it apart. But like they didn't know how to break up a serious dog fight, especially when you're dealing with like two pit bulls that are fighting with each other, which notoriously is more intense than a lot of other breeds, obviously. So it just kind of it got really messy because of all of that, and I think that's why the fight ultimately was so bad, was because there was no, you know, we didn't know how to break it up. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So when we put them back together, luckily, it wasn't like they really tried to fight each other again. They kind of went back through those same motions of like, okay, cool, we're interacting with each other, and then we start kind of playing with each other, and then it hits a point where it might kind of start to flip over, and that's where we create the off switch of adding the correction in for it. You know what I mean? Or we teach them to disengage and stuff at that point. But ultimately, I think really when we put them back together with each other, because we were just more aware of like supervising when they started playing with each other, it didn't wind up flipping over to that, and we didn't really need to do a whole lot of correcting for it, and ultimately they kind of just like figured out their relationship organically, like most dogs will, you know.
Do you think a big piece of that is the ability, I mean, obviously to a certain extent there was an emotional component from the humans, but I've always wondered if, because you know most average pet owners they've never seen a dog fight, so it's like when they see their own dogs fighting
100%.
it's like another level.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like I feel like then after that initial fight, then they're constantly on edge, which is likely what's going to trigger more of the intensity of the fights in the future.
Yeah.
Whereas like with my own personal dogs, like they get into like tics.
Little squabbles.
Yeah, every now and then, and it's just like because to me, you know, obviously I know what I'm looking at. There's no like continued fear that I'm like supplying to the situation, so the dogs are just like, oh, we just pissed each other off, whatever.
Well, yeah, and we know, like, when we're socializing any dogs, right, let alone our personal dogs, that the human element is typically what creates the confusion that leads to the ultimate fighting. You know what I mean? So, yeah, 100% people will get scared, and they will either, again, manage and separate and just, like, avoid the problem altogether, which intensifies it organically, right? Or, yeah, they'll, like, excessively micromanage, right? The second they even look at each other weird, it's like, hey, stop it, don't do that, this, that, right? Yeah. And it just creates more stress and more misunderstanding and stuff amongst the dogs that will lead to them just kind of feeling weird around each other, you know, which then, again, makes it more likely that they're going to get into fights in the future. Yeah, you're 100% right about that. What have you seen with this kind of stuff? Like, what's... you know, like where as you, because obviously I have the context as far as they're concerned of just seeing the dogs and working with the dogs. What were you kind of noticing as you were talking with the owner and you know, kind of how she navigated and handled the situation when it first started?
Yeah, she admitted that she's just very nervous and she's very anxious.
There you go.
So a lot of her anxiety was feeding into that, or anytime that they would interact or get into a squabble, it'd be a lot of screaming, and all that screaming and energy probably fed into the intensity of the fighting.
Yeah.
And then constantly separating them. Like, as a human, you can't be perfect all the time with your dogs, and you're going to have errors, and when those errors happen, you have to know how to handle them. And when those errors would happen with her, she didn't know what to do. You know, she looked at it as like this horrible regression of the success she'd had for maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And we kind of talk through, like, it's even after their training, it's very likely that they may get into a squabble in the future, but it's not the end of the world. We're going to rebuild essentially and implement our structure where we need to, but we're not going to separate them and have them live a life of crate and rotate.
Yeah.
So from what I was seeing of her, it was just a lot of nervous energy. She looked defeated, like absolutely defeated. And she was one of those people that just really loved her dogs, like all owners do, but she had a lot of passion. And
you can tell the people that really get, you know, obviously, which is obviously good, not bad. But,
so she was a lot of self-blame. She came in and she said, I feel like a failure. And I said, you're not a failure. Like, these things happen. And we're going to figure out a game plan for you and help you kind of have harmony back in your house so you can keep both dogs. So it was a lot of nervous energy.
Yeah. You know what? Another interesting thing that I see that correlates with this is, you know, we kind of assume that, you know, so us as humans, right, we rationalize with each other and we're able to communicate when we like things, when we don't like things. And because we have a whole complex verbal language, we're able to do that with minimal conflict sometimes. You know what I mean? With dogs are very binary, black and white with things, right? They only know how to communicate things in very particular certain ways. And in a lot of times they're physical ways. You know what I mean? And we look at, like, dogs should never dislike something that another dog is doing, or that there's something wrong with that. You know what I mean? So, like, you see the dog that snaps at the other dog to, like, get out of their face, or we see the dog that starts barking at the other dog for whatever reason. You know what I mean? And we look at that immediately like, oh my God, they're being aggressive. It's like, no, they're being a dog, right? Like they're just communicating with each other. That's it, right? Yeah. And again, you want to be aware of those things, and you want to ask yourself sometimes, again, am I contributing to this problem sometimes? Is there something that I'm doing that's making the dogs feel more likely that they have to do that, right? But ultimately, dogs need to learn how to communicate both sides of the spectrum very appropriately. You know what I mean? And the dogs that come in that have aggression issues or inner household aggression issues or whatever it may be, a lot of times just don't know an appropriate way to communicate when they're uncomfortable with something, and they just go to this level 11 intensity with things. You know what I mean? And the problem is not just like we have to squash that and use all this punishment and stuff to fix that. The problem is they just need to organically start to realize in a safe manner that if they're uncomfortable with something, you don't need that level like 11 intensity, right? You could try it because we'll see a lot of times they try the level 11 intensity and it makes the other dog go away, and they're like, oh, cool, that worked, right? Mm-hmm. But the next time they try maybe a level 9 intensity, right? And they realize, oh, wait, that worked too, right? Then they try level 7 the next time, which is exactly the same progression we saw with Brody and Eddie, right? Is as they realized you can communicate boundaries with each other. We're not going to stop you from communicating boundaries with each other, but just like take it back a notch, right? Like you don't need to go into it with this intensity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you know, again, it's a self-reinforcing behavior, right? Them communicating those boundaries feels good to them because it works. So as they realize it doesn't need to be so intense, that's where they start to get more healthy with those interactions, you know? And, you know, we saw that progression with them. We saw that progression with Benny's another great example that we saw recently, who just like learned because he was scared because another dog attacked him, obviously, that he just needed to go in with this like freaking ridiculous intensity to make other dogs go away. And as he realized that I could do a little bit less, we saw it because it's a spectrum, just move a little bit less like this and a little bit more like this until it turned into the play, right? Mm-hmm. And I really think a lot of the mistake that a lot of trainers are making right now is, you know, too much emphasis on you have to correct that because they shouldn't display it at all, period. You know what I mean? Which is, in my opinion, just very unrealistic.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, like, I think everybody, like you were talking about, when you first start working with dogs with these types of issues, you do, like, go to the hypervigilant, like, super micromanaged phase of everything.
100%. I did it. Yeah.
And the more that I, like, started to look at that, especially in the case when we were, like, with Eddie and Brody, we were giving them more freedom to, like, actually work through these things, it kind of made me think of a situation of like with kids even. Like if kids get into an argument, if you just separate them and you're like, now we're just never going to let you interact ever again. You're not teaching them how to have proper coping skills to actually problem solve and communicate effectively, you know, different boundaries. And so or to the extent to like they get into an argument and then the human or the adult is there and has to like mediate the entire conversation. Like that's not conducive for
on that.
Like that's not conducive for setting them up for success for the rest of their life, right? Of being able to communicate. And so that's kind of where like the light bulb went off with like Eddie and Brody. I was like, oh, like if we continue to micromanage everything, then they're constantly going to feel like they never got to finish that conversation or have that like resolve that they're looking for, that closure.
Sure.
And so they're just going to continue wanting to do that every single time they see each other.
Yeah.
Whereas if you allow them the freedom to actually figure out the appropriate way of setting those boundaries in a safe situation, obviously.
Yeah. And again, we have to turn off our brain of like, oh, but like it's so scary and this and that, because again, it's the only thing dogs know, right? Yeah. Dogs know how to communicate boundaries with their mouth, with the noises they do, with the dominant looking behaviors that they do and stuff like that. It's the only way they know how to do it. There's no solution for that aside from them realizing they could do it less intensely, you know? So Bridget, why don't you kind of walk everybody through the progression we saw with them as we allow, like what did it look like? What were the stages that you saw them kind of go through with things before we got them to a point where they were like really like playing and stuff?
Yeah. So, day one, you were obviously involved in that. We muzzled them up, obviously, just to see what the interaction was going to look like. And I was like, this is either going to be like nothing or it's going to be really
as it always is, right?
Yeah. So I was worried it was going to be nothing, and I just feel like, oh, well, we can't, like we were talking about, we can't recreate problem behaviors in our facility. And sure enough, when we got them together, it was like the most intense
Before
fight.
we even let them together,
Yeah.
like I remember I was holding Eddie and you walked Brody in and he was just immediately like snarling and growling at him and stuff just as soon as he saw
Yeah.
him.
And you were like, let the leashes go. And I was like, really? We let the leashes go, and it was just on contact. Like, Eddie had some moves on Brody, and I like remember feeling so bad for Brody. I was like, this poor dog.
Yeah.
And then toward the end of what we were watching, Brody very much had a piece of it because he kept going back and like,
Every time Eddie would stop, Brody would kind of like go back
Yeah.
for more and
He's
like
like-
almost egg him on. Remember that like
Yeah.
butt swing that he was doing that first day? Like Eddie would stop. And to clarify like what it kind of looked like. So right away when they went at each other, it was kind of both of them. They jumped up the paw thing and stuff. And it was just like, right. And same deal. We kind of step back, let it play out. And it kind of like stopped for a second, then they went back for more, then stopped for a minute, they let back go, then Brody kind of stopped, and Eddie just like kind of like mounted him and would just like muzzle punch his back a bunch of times, you know? And then same deal, that just kind of progressed for a while, and then Brody kind of looked like he was trying to get away and stuff, and then Eddie stopped, and then we started seeing over the course of, what was that, maybe an hour, just over an hour, something like that we had them together for. We saw the first maybe 10 minutes, it was pretty quick. Like if there was a break, it went right back to them kind of trying to like punch at each other and dominate each other and do all that other kind of stuff, right? And then we started seeing just like, it was like fewer and further in between. Like they would stop for a minute and they would kind of like go off to the other side of the room and like take a breather, then kind of go back at it, then go off to the side of the room and take a breather, then go back at it. And over the course of that session, we saw it go from pretty much like, again, the on contact to it ended with them just totally exhausted, like on opposite sides of the rooms, just like laying on beds, just like, or staying away from each other, like on their own.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And part of that may have just been they were tired, right? A part of that may have been they realized it wasn't working. Like neither of them were really giving into it too much, you know? But ultimately they chose to just go put them somewhere else, right? And a lot of people, I'm sure honestly like 95% of trainers or more, if we showed them that entire clip of that session, which I'm still so pissed that we didn't take video of the whole thing, but it was like just Bridge and I there, and we were like, we got to keep our eyes on this right now. But if we showed them like that entire clip, and also let me triple clarify, like neither of the dogs were getting like injured by this or anything. Like it was set up in a very safe, controlled way. We even went as far as like we did their nails and stuff before, so they weren't able to scratch each other or anything like that. And obviously they had very safe, secure muzzles on, and we were in a position with their e-collars and drag lines and stuff where at any point we could have stepped in and intervened if we needed to, right? But I'm sure 95% of trainers or more, if we showed them that entire clip, would have immediately been like, they should have just been corrected for it right away, right? But here's the thing, right? We saw over the course of that, like we talked about, if you look at the spectrum, we saw it go from them trying to correct each other at this level 11 intensity to them organically on their own learn that they could do it with less. Right? They learned that they can get it. Like even when they started doing the mounting and stuff like that, it was from that level 11 intensity to like whatever. Let's hypothetically say like a 7 or something if we had to put a number on it, right? On its own. And if we corrected for that, all that would have done is suppress it completely, where it would have went from level 11 to level 0 without them learning they could do it with less. And here's the thing, right? I'm not a believer that, like, there's a time and a place for corrections. And we're going to get into a scenario of like an in-home assessment that I did the other day that we showed on the vlog here, where I did use a lot of corrections and stuff to kind of mitigate the issue a little bit. But if we don't allow them to figure it out at some point and you just correct it anytime you see it, in my opinion and in my experience, what happens is you get this false sense of them just avoiding each other. And then anytime they get in close contact, they can avoid each other until they can't avoid each other anymore. And it explodes into that highest level. You know what I mean? And that's where you see the dogs are good for a month. They're good for 2 months. And suddenly that one trigger happens that just totally freaking sets them off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, corrections have their time and place with this kind of stuff. Like we have to know once we've had them kind of figure out their issue, that we could disengage them still and we still have proper control over them and stuff like that. But that's not ultimately what's solving the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry. So that was the first time that we put them together. So what did we kind of start to see after that as we were working with them?
So I think it was like the first 2 sessions we saw that intense fighting, that very intense, like Eddie on top of Brody, just like going at him. And then I think like the third or fourth time, it was just like they would come in the room and ignore each other. And it would,
I do remember that.
yeah, like going on opposite sides because they knew that nothing was going to come of the fighting. So it was interesting to start to see the dial turn a little bit, and those little wins led to like when you were like, well, let's take them off muzzle, and you had a session, so Michelle and I did it. And I remember like finally unclipping the muzzles, just like it was like slow motion, just that unclip, and then the muzzles coming off, and they kind of like looked at each other, and they were really stiff, and I was like heart into my chest, and then they were like silent, slow motion, and then they started playing and running around and just being complete idiots. So much fun. And I remember like looking at you and I was like, I want to cry right now.
It was a really beautiful moment.
It was. It was.
And I remember like before we took the muzzles off, we were like, okay, you're in charge of Eddie.
Yeah.
I'll get Brody
Yeah.
if anything happens.
What?
Exactly.
So obviously I remember like I was getting ready to go in my session. I was like, you know, I told you guys, I think I was like, well, like I want to do the off muzzle stuff. And then I think I was walking away. I was like, you know what? I was like, if you guys feel good with it, just fucking do it. You know, what made you guys feel like, hey, like this is the time that we should give this a go?
I just felt like it had reached a point where that intensity had dialed down so much that it wasn't as grudgy. And when they were getting together, they were like trying to figure each other out, and it looked playful. The body language looked like okay.
Yeah.
So we decided just to take a chance. We had all the precautions necessary, so we said, like, let's just try it, and it ended up really, really successful.
Yeah, that was
And
cool.
It seemed like we'd seen them like many times communicate successfully
Yeah.
with each other and it not escalate past a certain point. And then it almost felt like the muzzles were impeding their ability
Sure.
to actually
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like the muzzle was no longer a safety precaution and more like a cause of frustration almost.
Yeah.
In the interaction.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, yeah.
And so that's when I felt like that they were ready for that.
Yeah.
And something I remember seeing, I think maybe the session before that or something that was like, because I think you were gone. Yeah, you were gone for a little bit because you had COVID. And
Yeah, thanks for that.
and I was putting them together and stuff like that, and I started seeing that. Yeah, same deal. Like there was no like intensity as far as like they were trying to fight each other, but Eddie still was doing that. Eddie's signature move is the like jump on the back. You know what I mean? And initially when we saw it, it was pretty intense and it was jump on the back and try to bite the back kind of thing. But then we just started realizing like that's like his move, you know? Like
And
with
like Brody's butt swish.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, like it was so funny to see that in the beginning as like
Yeah.
part of his fighting,
Uh-huh.
but then in the end that was like his main go-to play move.
Because it's the same
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
You know what I
Just
mean?
the
Like
intensity
fighting in
level
the
was
play.
different.
It's the same thing, just on a different part of the spectrum. It's so interesting, you
Yeah.
know. But yeah, like that was really cool when we saw that, and then we did it again the next day, obviously, and like it was like at that point they were just like best long lost buds, you know, like
Yeah.
they were just like they got it right, and they got it on their own, which I think was the coolest part about it. And then okay, so like after that, what other sorts of things did you do with them to kind of help work them through that?
So almost every day that I worked, I got them together. And then after just the two of them together, then we started implementing, well, what if we bring a third dog in? And it was Millie, because Millie's super social and she's big enough to like kick them off of her if she needed to. And they were so intensely going at Millie. Both of them were just like, poor Millie. Like one end was Brody, one end was Eddie.
And not in a fighting way, like
No.
just like
Yeah.
intensely playing. Yeah.
And Millie was just like, this is great.
Yeah.
And then I remember the only correction I had ever given the boys was when they got into a tiny little squabble over
yeah.
Millie. And it was like everything I've known about dogs was like when they start fighting, you got to yell and scream and try to get them. And
It
it
was
just like,
so chill.
yeah,
Right? Remember that?
stepping back
Yeah.
and watching it for a moment and then acting after I corrected. I think it was just one correction. And Eddie was like, oh shit, like, okay.
and it was funny because like we talked about of like our goal being taking that intensity down a couple notches. So if they communicate that they're uncomfortable with something, it's not super crazy. Like we reviewed back the footage of it that we had, and it was like, yeah, I think Brody was playing with Millie, and Eddie did the jump on the back move, and because Brody was busy playing with Millie, he kind of turned around and gave him a little attitude, and it was like what you would see out of like our personal dogs. So they turn around and just like real quick little like mouthy squabble, and same deal. No, stop it, right? Gave him a correction for it. And it was like, yeah, they just kind of like a couple minutes, like decompressed for a second and then went right back at it, you know? And there was no conflict or fallout from it because they realized what they had done wrong. And we weren't just like squashing their ability to communicate altogether.
Yeah.
You know, that was really cool to see. So where did you see that like your obedience training and stuff then came in and played a role throughout this process?
I guess like obedience didn't have too much to do with the actual success of the socialization. So I was thinking like the third week when I started actually working them together, like bed stays on 2 different beds and just learning to coexist with each other in a training sense. And then I started to do it off muzzle, and Brody would be on one bed, Eddie would be on another, and just kind of coexist. And I'd bring other dogs out and kind of mimicking what their at-home life would be, where the other dogs are out walking around and the boys are still expected to hold their bed stays.
Yep.
So that was really where the obedience started to come into play, because it's going to be used in the house, not to prevent the fights, but just to kind of chill everybody out.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
that was interesting to watch.
Yeah, just create like a little bit of an off switch for situations where they may not fight with each other, but it would be inappropriate for them to be getting really intense with each other. So ultimately, even though we helped facilitate them developing their like social hierarchy with each other, we still kind of sit at the top of that, because that is an important factor in things, because there are outside variables that will trigger fights with any dog, right? Doorway, right? Food, toys, stuff like that, that in interdog households, you can't avoid, right? Like those things are going to happen sometimes. There's going to be a toy out, a piece of food is going to fall on the ground, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So the obedience training helps them still see that ultimately with that kind of stuff, we are still on the top of the spectrum with it, you know?
Yeah.
Michelle, where do you see like using some of your examples of like, let's say Morty and Pippa or whatever, that the obedience training then fits into this equation?
I was thinking kind of in the same aspect of like the environmental stuff
Yeah.
that can happen, because like you had said with Eddie and Brody, their first fight was triggered by like this loud noise, which then took me down a rabbit trail in my head of like how a lot of I think inner dog fighting in households leads to like insecurities, and where kind of I think I saw it the most with Brody. I felt like I saw his confidence really go up with everything, because initially with the way Eddie was interacting with him, I could tell he was very much the type of dog that would like take it, and then he's just like full on attack mode, because he doesn't know how to set those calmer like boundaries up front of like, hey, thanks, but no thanks. Let's not do that right now. And so while, like you said, it was like really sad to watch him in the beginning, and you're like, oh, Brody, like you're just getting beat up right now. It was like we had to allow him to go through that so that he could figure out he's capable on his own to set those boundaries, rather than just like take it until he just explodes.
You know what? That's an interesting point that swings me back to like, forget inner dog household stuff, but like quote unquote rehabilitating or building confidence in insecure dogs and social, right? And the common mentality being advocate, as opposed to like going back to the video we posted of Maximus bullying Kiwi or whatever. Remember that one? That people fucking freaked out over, right?
Yeah.
Huey is a case in point example of a dog that when he first started coming to daycare, he was the most like shut down, insecure dog ever, right? He was just so overwhelmed being in the group, and we didn't advocate for him all the time. We taught him how to kind of tolerate that with appropriate dogs, and that dog came immensely out of his shell, right? And like, yeah, like Maximus was a big pushy dog, which is why he was communicating those boundaries to him, but like these insecure dogs need to be challenged a little bit to be made stronger. You know what I mean? So that they realize, yeah, like I have more control than I think I do. I don't have to go hide into my shell because I could set these boundaries on my own, and ultimately that they work, you know?
Yeah, and that's where I feel like some of the obedience can come into play with affecting the socialization, because with those nervous dogs, I think obedience is a really great way to build confidence.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And so then they take that confidence and it translates to, oh, I can stand up for myself and communicate. Like Morty was a really good example of that, where he was a nasty little dude, but he was just terrified.
Yeah.
Like he had just become, I mean, he was an older dog, so his entire life he had become very confident in his coping skill of aggression, but it was still sourced from a very insecure place.
Yeah.
So, you know, his way of dealing with anything that made him uncomfortable was to bite it, right? Including his owner, including the other dog, anything in that situation. And he would get triggered by environmental factors. I know with Pippa, the reason they would get into fights is because Morty would want to play and Pippa would correct them and be like, I don't want to play right now. And he couldn't take that correction because it would scare him, and then it would trigger a fight because he would go after her.
And he also never was taught to handle like pressure and corrections and stuff like that from his owner, right? So which is where the human side of things, the obedience training comes into play, right? I remember that was the first thing when I went to the house to go assess that situation, was just like, that dog had never been disciplined for anything in his life.
Nope.
Let me throw out a trigger word here. I bonked him in the house for reacting at the door, and throw out a fucking trigger word here, right? I told her, I was like, listen, like I'm gonna bonk him right now for this, right? And she's like, all right, cool, whatever. Bonked him. He tried to freak the fuck out at the doorway when the doorbell rang, and that was another trigger point they were seeing that was causing the fights. And I remember I bonked him, and he turned around and looked at me and just gave me this freaking attitude, like he was very motivated by me. He's like, what the fuck was that, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And we did it one more time, and he was like on his P's and Q's, you know? And it was just like, you could tell that response to being given a correction was to try to come at me and bite me, right? Yeah. And he just had to realize that didn't work, you know? And I didn't even correct for it, you know? He got the correction. He came around, gave me some attitude. I just kind of stopped him with the leash. We did it one more time. I bonked him again, and that time he just took the correction, right? And then it was like the rest of that day, we were working crate drills, which was a big problem for her, right? We were running the doorway and stuff like that. And he just needed to learn to respect being given a correction, right? And realize there was somebody higher on the totem pole than he was. So, do you want to give some context of that situation, like exactly? And like, did you finish your lessons with him, right? And like kind of how that wrapped up and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, when they initially came to us, she was very similar in that she was just like very defeated because she had gotten a lot of information from different trainers, and a lot of them, they just weren't very hopeful about her situation with Morty being older. And so
like 9, something like that.
Yeah, around there. And they were basically like, you know, the amount of work and effort it's going to take to correct these issues. Is it really worth the investment in such an old dog? So maybe you should just euthanize them. Like, just really, really like disheartening conversations.
Do you want to talk on that for a minute as far as the reasoning for why it was going to be such a big investment?
Oh.
Because I know you have opinions on this.
Yeah.
I forget who it was and everything. Just like the situation as a whole.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it was very much a board and train or nothing type conversations with her, where they were like, we're only going to be able to address this or fix these things with a board and train, which, I mean, if you can do it in a board and train, then you can do it in private lessons. There should be no reason otherwise.
It might be we might be able to get a little bit more headway in a board and train sometimes when you're dealing with the emotional aspect of people, sometimes getting a little confidence and like seeing it working before you have to jump in and do it. Like it's not like there's not benefits sometimes to doing a board and train, but I agree. It's absolutely not a requirement.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like in a situation with a dog that is being aggressive towards the owner,
yes,
I think it's better to do, in my personal opinion, I think private lessons can be a better option because you have far more check-in points to see how things are going versus, you know, you take the dog, you put in all this effort, but then you have a lot more work on the back end once it goes home of doing some more of that troubleshooting. Whereas like with Natalie and Morty, we were able to each week be like, okay, so how did this go? What was the interactions like there? Okay, let's tweak this, let's tweak that. And I think it also her being able to go through the process fully with him was her own confidence building with the dog.
Yeah.
And I think she really needed that.
She
but
had to work through those hurdles herself too, right? In a board
yeah.
and train, like we're going to work past a lot of the hurdles, and the owner will still have to do it, but like it'll be a little bit less intensified, you
Sure,
know?
sure.
With the one-on-ones, like you have to work. If your dog, like when I did that assessment with him, right? Like you're going to have to work through that of like you give him a big correction for something, and he gives you some attitude, and you got to be like, nah, dude, not going to work right now, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, he hurt her. I mean,
Yeah.
she had some holes in her.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
he was not afraid to hurt her.
And he's
so,
this big.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah. He's like a
That's what it
Yorkie
is, huh?
poo, I think.
Yeah.
Or
That's a
something,
dog.
or-
He is a dog that's going to live forever.
Oh yeah.
When I met him, like when she told me 9 years old, I was like, listen, like 9 is old for some dogs,
Yeah.
right? And I met him,
Not
I was like,
him.
this dog looks like he's like 4,
Oh yeah.
you know?
No, he's a cool little dog. But yeah, and I mean, like our first session was just her being confident enough to put a muzzle on him.
Yeah.
Because I was like, the muzzle is going to be such an important component for her to feel confident working with him throughout the day, so
Yeah.
that if he does get an attitude, she doesn't feel like she has to retreat, or else she's going to get bit again. So yeah, I mean, she did incredible work with him. She was like super dedicated. So I'm really glad that she stuck it out and found what she was looking for as
Yeah.
far as somebody who was willing to work with her.
As far as the issues amongst Morty and Pippa, what was the progression of because like she pretty much, when I did the assessment, had them totally separate. What was the progression of you getting them like back together?
So I did have her keep them separate for probably, I'd say like the first 3 weeks we were doing sessions until at least I could get like a pretty good solid foundation
Sure.
with the e-collar with Morty. But I made sure to tell her that I didn't want them completely like socially isolated. I just wanted them like mechanically separated, as in like I didn't want them never seeing each other.
Yeah.
You know, because I do think that can make it worse when you're doing like a situation with inter-household fighting if they never see each other.
Sure.
So just like one dog being in the crate and the other dog being out and vice versa,
Yep.
where they can still acknowledge the other dog is there. And even like taking them on walks, like her and her boyfriend could each manage one dog separately and walk them together, you know, things like that. But I just had her keep them to where they weren't actually interacting. And then once he was good with the muzzle, once we had the e-collar set up, once we were able to minimize his aggression to where the environmental triggers weren't setting him off quite as much anymore, then I started allowing her to let them interact. And just with the instruction of, like we talked about, if Pippa corrects him and doesn't want to play and he goes into full attack mode, that then you could correct him for that.
Yeah.
And I think she said she had to give him one high level correction for that in the instance with the 2 dogs, and then never had to do it again.
Yeah.
And then she had to give him one high level correction when he turned on her out in the yard once, because a neighbor dog came
I
out.
forgot. Yeah, they had a fence thing or something
Yeah,
out there.
the neighbor
Yeah,
dog came out, set him off. He hit the end of his leash and then turned back around and came at her. And she corrected him on a high level for that, like I had told her. And then that problem never happened again either. So,
Hell yeah. Josh, this is the least talking you've had to do in a while. How's it feel?
Feels great.
You got anything to add in? any
I mean,
any knowledge you want to throw at us?
I don't know. The only thing I can think of is I keep thinking about how these situations are like in movies, you know, it's like the main protagonist and the hero like go at it, and like they're fighting the whole movie, and then they have the big fight, and then like the hero's like puts his arm out, you know, and then they're like now best friends forever, you know. It's that's kind of how it feels like for these dogs, you know. They just have all this pent up aggression toward each other.
Just let it rip for a
they
minute.
Just,
They're just like, we're good.
Yeah, let it. But I mean, it seems to be that's kind of the thing. They just have this like weird way. They just don't know how to communicate, and they finally get it through. And they're like, "This is what I was saying.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it." And you know, and then they can just like chill and be together.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just, you know, you got to factor in when you're working with these kinds of cases, like the types of breeds you're working with, and that it has a little bit of a factor at play, but more so the big thing about the different types of breeds is certain ones are just going to look so much more intense than they actually are. Like you deal with like German Shepherd's a great example that's so misunderstood, like when they're playing with other dogs because they're so freaking loud and pawsy and move so quick and they're big and like they have such ginormous teeth and like you know what I mean? Like
they're always grabbing the necks.
100%, right?
Always, yeah.
Always.
And like I've seen situations where you have like two confident German Shepherds you put together and they first start playing with each other and it's like bears wrestling. I think when you get into like socializing some dogs that are like so much bigger and stronger than you are, that it's so intimidating to watch because like it's even as trainers sometimes hard to get out of that state of mind of like, what if this turns into a big brawl? And it's like, am I even like physically strong enough to be able to stop it?
Yeah.
So it could be really scary, and I get it, but it just goes back to this is the most interesting part of the job for me, is the socialization work. That's like, especially in the last 2 years, 3 years, that's really what like gets me going is that aspect of things, because I feel like it's the one area where I feel like I'm knowledgeable enough where we've been able to make a lot of strides with it, but I'm humble enough with it to know like there's still so much we don't know about it because all we're doing is interpreting, So it gets me going. I fucking like it.
What's really interesting too is that like, especially with Morty and Pippa, the behavioral progress and the success in that realm was actually faster than like the obedience side of things.
Yeah.
Like those two like struggled with the obedience a little bit more.
Yeah.
But like behaviorally, it was like leaps and bounds.
Which is instinctual. Behavioral stuff is instinctual.
Yeah, it's just interesting because it's like I think a lot of people still think an obedient dog is like
a well-behaved
dog, which it's not.
No. Yeah.
So it's really cool to, even though we see it all the time, it still never ceases to amaze me that like you can see a behavioral and like personality somewhat change with the dog before you can really get a lot of that really solid obedience in there too.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, and affection, that was a big thing I told her to take out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not a lot of affection.
Multi-dog households, affection can be the absolute worst thing, and it's like, we've talked about this before, you can't go as far as like, there's some trainers that post this like real head ass shit, like you literally can't ever pet your dog kind of thing and stuff, and like that's how you're going to adjust your relationship and stuff. And it's like, listen, you want to be aware of your interactions with your dog and stuff, but like eliminating it altogether is kind of unrealistic unless it's for a very short period of time,
Yeah. Sometimes I'll have people, like, I'll tell them, like, their first week, if we have, like, a big behavioral problem like that, I'll tell them, you can't pet your dog at all this week.
Yeah.
And I only do that just so they become very aware of how much they do it. Not because it's that important, but because then all of a sudden they come back the next week and they're like, that was the most difficult thing I've ever had to do.
Yeah. And we'll also see, like, then you start realizing, like, how much your dog is in control of the interactions. Because then when you don't do it, you see how much more they're pushing you and how much more annoying they get from it, But, with multi-dog households, like, the affection thing, like, you have to, it's a resource that you have to control still, right? Like, no different than toys and food, right? Where, like, I'm going to make sure my dogs aren't stealing toys from each other all the time. And I'm going to make sure that if I feed my dogs and they're all out together, that they're not going and, like, trying to steal food out of each other's bowls. I control the affection. And that's the one that people look at differently, right? Like, when it comes to the affection, it's like, we want to hug all our dogs at once, right? And we want to have all of them come on our lap at once and this and that, where that's the number one place I see problems, Yeah. I mean, and you want to talk about, like, you were bringing up with Brody and Eddie's owner how she was scared of like these like big fights breaking up.
Yeah.
I have a couple of like borderline like horror stories that stick in my head that I heard from people that reached out to us about training of things that have happened with multiple dogs, and like how bad some of these situations can get. Like like it's gnarly. Like I can think of two in particular, right? One of them, and we'll leave all the names and everything out of this, obviously. But I had a lady reach out to me one time, and she sent me just this freaking novel on Facebook telling me this story about how she had maybe 4 dogs. I don't know, 4 or 5 dogs. I think it was 4. She had 4 dogs, and they would play together, this, that. But these two like would get in these like gnarly fights with each other, right? They'd get these fights, and none of them were very big dogs. They were like mid-sized dogs, like 40 to 55 pounds, and she said, they got in this one fight outside in the yard one time. All of the dogs started fighting each other, like all 4 of them. She couldn't break it up. Her neighbor couldn't break it up. They're battling it the fuck out, right? She's trying everything, the hose, this, that. She had to call the police. The police came. The police couldn't do anything to stop the fight. The only thing that stopped it is one of the dogs died.
Ooh.
Yep. Crazy, right? And that's the realities of some of this.
Yeah.
You know? One other one was it was like a 5-dog household. They every single night would have cuddle time on the couch in the basement while they were watching movies.
Oh no.
Cuddle.
Right? And same deal. These were all relatively large dogs, right? Same deal. One day, boom, massive dog fight broke out. They, in the process of breaking the fight up, the wife broke her arm. The dog turned around, latched on, and literally snapped her arm. She had to get her arm like in a cast and stuff from it. All of the dogs were massively injured from it. I don't think, like, none of them died or anything, but like I think almost every single one of the dogs had to go to the emergency vet. She had to go to the emergency room, obviously, with a broken arm. Like, everybody was injured. Everybody's, you know, and that was a situation that we actually didn't wind up doing training with them because they couldn't not have that life with their dogs. You know, like it just wasn't going to be successful. You know, so you know, obviously the human element of this is it's like the number one part of it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And if you can't be like humbled enough to know that like there's adjustments you need to make with those kinds of things, like you're not going to be successful with that kind of stuff. So, but man, those 2 in particular, I remember I was like, God damn, I can't even imagine. You know, like I said, like I've experienced gnarly dog fights before, right? Like, but that's like a whole nother level.
Oh yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that's it. It's always baffled me, like having 4 dogs of my own, and obviously them being very well trained, it's entirely manageable. I can't imagine having that many dogs without any training.
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Chaos all the time.
Yeah.
I just like, so any of my clients that like, or anyone I talk to that wants to get multiple dogs, I'm like, you need to train the dog you have first, then you get another one, then you train that one, then you get another one.
If you want to sell online,
don't acquire
make
all of
sure
these
you
dogs
stand
and
out.
then get yourself
Go
in
to
quite the
Wix
pickle.
So I want to see if I can find this real quick here. This was from the assessment that I did the other day. Where is it at? I fucking love doing this vlog series, by the way. I feel like we capture so much more interesting conversations and stuff through it. Okay, so she's got these 2 dogs. Let me get a little volume here.
Look at all those ads.
Yeah.
We're making that money.
Monetized. All right, let's see.
Now you said, so you've done a little bit of training with him before. You said you did some e-collar training with him? We do.
Wait, where are we at? Yeah, what the hell is this? Get this fucking ad out of here. This fucking ad. I'm actually going to skip past here real quick because I think she talks about the trainer that she did the training with. And I'm not trying to put anyone on blast here. And actually, the trainer did a good job with them. It just wasn't, they weren't working on this.
How did you do your training?
Nope.
Where'd you do it? How perfect was that moment?
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
All right. So
They're good at that.
they have this apartment. She's got these 2 little dogs. They're both the same breed, I'm pretty sure. As soon as I walked in the front door here, she had one in this room, one in this room. These dogs have been living in separate houses for like a month or 2 now because they got in a couple really gnarly fights with each other. And for them, it started off as just fights that were triggered over environmental stuff, right? They absolutely lost their mind when I walked in the door, right? Like any noise they heard outside, they absolutely lost their mind. The husband or boyfriend or whatever got home like 10 or 15 minutes into the assessment and they freaked out just trying to climb all over him and stuff like that. And there was just like no control, right? Everything, forget fighting, everything was already at level 11 intensity. You know what I mean? So in their case, right, it started off as that. They got in a couple major fights that were triggered by these things, right? And then it turned into the grudginess, right? So I took a little bit of an opposite approach with them of instead of worrying about their interactions first, I was just worried about the environmental stuff first. Let's get you guys chilled the fuck out because you're too much right now, right? So we took an option of we were correcting for things, and you'll see in a minute here when they let the other dog out, obviously. Kind of how we worked through that. So,
Out of curiosity, where was it that you did the training?
no, Stop. Why?
You're really determined to play that clip.
No.
Just do the little. Just
Forget it's got
10,
that. Here,
like
let me
5
just-
seconds.
Let me just do this.
There you go.
All right, here we go. So let him out. Suddenly. So this one has become really, really scared of this one. This one just wanted to get at this one the whole time.
Oh yeah, look at him.
He's a little asshole.
Yeah, you could
He just
tell.
looks like it, you know?
When's the last time you've had them together?
Probably 2 weeks ago. So Archie stays at Matt's parents'
Yes.
house. And
So you see the climbing all over, obviously. At one point, she put that one away so that we could talk because he wouldn't shut up, obviously. At one point, a dog walked by this door right here, and he lunged at the door, trying to get under the door, like trying to like bite at the other dog and stuff like that. So a lot of environmental stuff. Kind of zooming through here. Let me see if I can find anything interesting here. Okay, so we wound up putting e-collars on here. My first goal was stop the environmental stuff. So reacting at anything. And then in addition to that, I don't know how much page left in this here.
Good. Perfect.
Yeah. So let me see if I can go back to that.
If I could
Yeah. So you'll hear I talk about here how I wanted to teach them initially just to disengage from each other and everything else going on outside.
I got you. Okay. Buddy.
And this guy was just testing where some of his obedience was at. I love the harness e-collar combo. Bring it down a little bit there.
I'm gonna have you just totally ignore him here. So all I want to do right now is if he does start kind of lighting up at him, I want to see if I can disengage him like that. I want to see him disengage, obviously, from that overstimulation. And I don't have literally any expectation of what he does aside from disengage from that, right? And I'm kind of individually trying to see how they respond to this stuff, you know? Pretty good.
He does it down here or not?
Good. Perfect.
Boomer's fighting back for all the things he said.
Yeah, right?
What's his name?
Boomer and Archie.
Boomer.
They actually just signed up. He's going to be doing a 4-week board and train with us. Archie's going to do a 1-week refresher. So this is where he started coming in the door, started lighting up over there. Oh, that was the other dog. Yeah.
We got excitement coming from everywhere. Okay. So right now all I'm doing is just kind of seeing how individually they respond to things. So kind of when I'm focused on him, I'm not worried about him, vice versa.
Where is it? There it is.
Lost in there for a second.
Okay, whatever. So I'm not going to sit here and do this all day because I know Michelle needs to go to her lesson, obviously. But so the idea was, again, when we're dealing with these dogs, you have the two sides of the spectrum of dealing with their interactions first and then obviously dealing with their environmental stuff through the actual training and stuff that we're doing. And it's not that you have to do one first over the other one. Obviously, in the case of Brody and Eddie, you did a decent amount of training with them before we put them together with each other so that we had some communication established so that when we put them together with each other, we knew if we needed to disengage them, we could ultimately, but you have to address both sides of the spectrum and kind of ultimately wrapping up a lot of this kind of stuff. What we've found to be the solution for working with fighting dogs is that twofold approach of splitting your brain into their interactions with each other and addressing the hurdle of them learning how to interact in an appropriate way, learning how to de-intensify on their own, obviously, and then in addition to that, a appropriate enough amount of training to deal with the outside factors that may trigger fights that you can't avoid with inner household dogs, right? And it's been really cool to work with a lot of these different dogs and kind of see the progression with a lot of those. So that's what we got. You know? Anybody have any fault? We're rushing to end this because I know luckily you got 10 minutes before you technically need to leave, but we'll get you to your lesson on time here. You guys have anything else you want to add to this? I feel like it was a pretty interesting discussion, but
Brody and Eddie are doing well.
Good.
First week home. We'll see them on Sunday, but the first week was all just
Sunday,
muzzles. Yeah.
Nice.
All just muzzling and getting reintroduced to the household. She sent me multiple pictures of them, and when they first got together, they just kind of went on their beds. Mm-hmm. She sent me another picture, and no, this is not the greatest, but they went in with muzzle on. They went into the same crate, and yeah.
Well, listen. Here's the thing. I don't condone letting your dogs go into the crate with each other because you deal with pinch points and like avoiding that kind of stuff. But we did simulate stuff like sticking them in obviously a large open kennel together in tighter spaces. You know, and again, like we want to, like there are certain triggers that we could just avoid altogether and have them not be problems, you know? Yeah. But inevitably, these dogs are going to run into situations where they kind of trap themselves in a corner of the house or something like that, and they do need to learn how to tolerate that. So, though, yes, I would agree with you. We're gonna try to coach through avoiding that. That is very positive. So, has she said that? Has she seen them start to try to like interact or play yet?
She said Eddie came up and put his paw on Brody, and that's pretty much the extent of the extent of the interactions they've had. So today she's introducing the girls back in.
Yeah.
The boys on muzzle to kind of see what that factor is going to look like.
Mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
I like it. Hell yeah. That's awesome.
Exciting.
Michelle, you got anything else you want to add? Any last points for the people to know?
I don't think so. This was a good discussion, guys.
I think so. It was good. All right, cool. Well, we're going to wrap that up. Josh, you got anything else you want to add?
No. The only thing that's sticking in my head is what she was saying when she kind of made the analogy of like the kids and like when you kind of stop it and you basically make a socially awkward child, you know? It's kind of the same thing. It seems like it's, you know, even when these, multi-dog households, it's like you're always stopping them before they can really communicate. So like you said, over time it just builds up because they don't know how to like make that communication connection. So it's just like you're good, and all of a sudden,
bottle it up.
Don't make a socially awkward.
Yeah, you make a kid who like doesn't know how to say like, "Hey, back off," and now they're just like punching kids on the playground.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that weird quiet kid, and all of a sudden he's just like and beats his bully up, and they're like, "Oh."
Yeah, it's like the Christmas Story.
Yeah.
Yes. He just beats the fuck out of that kid.
Yeah.
And like
a great scene.
He's like crying while he's doing it.
Like, yeah, that's what it is right there.
That was Brody.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, guys. We're going to wrap that up. We'll see you guys next time. If you guys have any other questions on this you want us to talk about, let us know.